Welcome to another episode of the Charlie and Andre podcast, this time on Rienzi, Roman figure, but in a different time from classical antiquity or the classical Roman Empire.
Yeah, so this is gonna be an interesting little not a lot of people might know about him, although he actually was celebrated in a lot of later European you know works of art and literature and music and things like that, as we'll go into later. So this is actually a guy who lived in like the mid 1300s in Italy. Um, his official name was Nicola Cola di Rienzo, also known as Rienzi. He was born in Rome, but he wasn't of noble birth or anything. He was like of common background. He claimed later that like he was the son of the Holy Roman Emperor, but that there was no way to substantiate that. But it's interesting though. So like he lived during sort of the beginnings, the very early beginnings of the what would become the Italian Renaissance. So you had some, early incipient kind of this is like the era of Petrarch, later Boccaccio, Dante already kind of did his thing as we went into another podcast about his work. So there was like some ideas about like the restoration of classical Greco-Roman values and forms of governance and art and things like that. And this guy, he during his youth, he basically spent a lot of time kind of reading stories about the glory of ancient Rome, and he being a native of Rome, and in this era, he kind of wanted to restore this now medieval city to its former glory in some way, and because during that era, there's a lot of decadence, degradation, criminality, wretchedness. So, one of his aims was to kind of restore order. Um, one of the early things that pushed him into this trying to make this dream a reality was his brother was killed by some of the local nobilities in Rome. So that kind of gave him like the impetus to try to start, some kind of move. He was originally a notary, but then he became well, he held other offices, and then eventually he led this rebellion in May 1347. Which Sunday he addressed like this assembled crowd very eloquently and passionately, and he actually gained a lot of support from the people. Um, and Yeah, he had some support from like the Pope. His relationship with the Pope was interesting. He did oppose some of the temporal power of the Pope, and also some of what the Holy Roman Emperor, who was at odds with the Pope at the time, was trying to do. But we'll get into that a little later. So yeah, he was trying to his aim was to restore well, in some ways he was taking from the Republic. Um, because in that he wanted this to be kind of something with grassroots to support from the people of Rome, there's like I guess a sort of demagogic, aspect to what he was doing. Um, but he eventually styled himself tribune of Rome after he defeated some of the local uh, barons and other nobility there that opposed him. Um, and at this point, Petrarch, as you'll get into later, I think he also, he congratulated him on his achievements and compared him with you know, Romulus and Brutus, Camillus. Let's see. Then he attempted to unify Italy. He had various campaigns. He actually gained support from the Kingdom of Naples and recognition there, as well as Louis the First of Hungary, interestingly. Um, but I don't know, his rule was he was very idealistic at first, but he had a certain sense of vanity, inexperience, kind of unsteadiness, and was physically kind of afraid of confrontation. So the more time went on, people kind of noticed these things, and yeah, he eventually kind of fell from power. Um, yeah, it also didn't help that he taxed the people a lot in order to for his means. So he became kind of ridiculed. He offended the Pope. He even tried to he proposed to set up a new Roman Empire. Obviously, the Holy Roman Emperor who lived in Germany at the time did not want this, nor did the Pope either. And then Clement, the anti-pope, or I guess the Avignon, at the time, this was during the Avignon papacy, which was actually in southern France. He had the guy deposed, and then some of the barons took heart and tried to depose Rienzi. Rienzi actually won in a battle against them, although he didn't himself participate. And his biggest rival, Stefano Colonna, was killed. But this victory, it was short-lived and didn't save him. The Pope then issued a papal bull, kind of denouncing him as a criminal, a heretic, and interestingly, a pagan, which is maybe because of his attempt to kind of go back to this classical Roman ideal. He he was in Naples for a while. He sought refuge. He ended up in an Italian monastery in the countryside. Eventually, he made his way to Prague in 1350. He tried to get protection from the Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV. Was imprisoned there for a while. Later, he was handed over to the Pope Clement in Avignon. Remained in prison. After that Pope died, the next one, Innocent the Sixth, he actually he had problems with the barons in Rome, so he saw this as an opportunity. He saw the idea of releasing Rienzi as an opportunity to kind of screw with them and undermine them. So then Rienzi returned to Rome, um, and he kind of regained power for a little bit. However, that turned against him pretty quickly because he put to death this well-liked soldier of fortune named Giovanni Memoriale, and then the people turned against him. He had other like cruel, arbitrary deeds that he committed during this time, and eventually the building he was in was lit on fire. He tried to escape under disguise, but fortunately he was found by the mob and murdered brutally by them. So kind of an inglorious end to this whole experiment, but. His legacy, however, lived on long beyond the actions of the time. So we can kind of go into that. I don't know if you have anything else to add about like.
Yeah, I mean it's he's a fascinating character. You and I were talking about him leading up to this podcast, and the reason he was kind of front and center in my mind was I was reading Gibbon's on the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and he kind of reflects on Rienzi at the end after the fall of Constantinople. And as you mentioned, like Rienzi is like
Yeah,
firmly in the 1300s, and the fall of Constantinople is 1453, right? So
100 years later.
he goes to the fall of Constantinople, which I think most consider like truly the fall of like the last vestiges of the Roman Empire. But
Right.
then it goes back to Rienzi, and it's interesting to just kind of reflect on like the narrative of like the dream of Rome. And it's interesting that he, as an Enlightenment thinker, is thinking like, what does it mean, like that the story of Rome is not ending in that fire of conquest in 1453, but it's ending in rhetoric and like, but it's ending in sort of a revival, like you mentioned, going back to the the classical ideals of the Roman Empire that are combined with this emerging Renaissance that are coming about with like Petrarch and everything. I mean, Gibbon calls Rienzi the last tribune of Rome, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
fascinating and interesting. He's talking about like virtue, like virtuous and civitas, and restoring civic order and all this stuff under the banners of liberty and the republic. So there, I think there's a lot of admiration, not just from Gibbon, but I think just in general from the Enlightenment era of like the eloquence of Rienzi's idealism, of kind of the irony that he's both theatrical and how what he's trying to do, right? He has these banners of the Republic, but he's also a man kind of out of his own time. Um, and I think that that speaks just to the Enlightenment's fascination with revival and failure, because the
Yeah.
Renaissance was a massive revival, but it was also in many respects like they didn't revive ancient Rome and Greece. They led to something new, which maybe it was better, but I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't what I think like many of them wanted to do. Like Petrarch and Rienzi, they want to restart the Roman Empire, and that didn't happen. I mean, it was that they wanted to unify. Like Petrarch has this beautiful poem about unifying Italy. Um, and I think even in modern people, they love that rhetoric, and maybe we're even susceptible to it. Like that, we believe that the past can be resurrected kind of through this beautiful imagination and everything and rhetoric. Um, and so it's interesting. Like Rienzi is communicating with Petrarch, and they influence later individuals such as Machiavelli, and like they're urging like this moral revival that's based around civic virtue, and that civic virtue is based on this concept, not necessarily like Christian virtue, although I'm sure it could have been informed, but they're yearning for this ancient Roman and moral, this ancient Roman moral and spiritual horizon that is kind of behind them. So they're kind of like you mentioned, there's this tension between the church, right? There's this tension between faith and nostalgia. And I mean, nostalgia is like a very human thing. I mean, even in our generation, we're nostalgic for what happened in our childhood,
Yeah.
with the proliferation of technology and everything. We can see like exact images we saw on TV in our childhood. But I
Us,
mean, there,
us in particular, yeah, we're very guilty of that.
yeah, I mean, it's a human condition, but I think like even Rienzi sees that. He's like, um, with Machiavelli, they're moving away from idealism into more realistic ideas, but this idea of virtue and virtua and fortuna, uh,
Virtuta,
they
yeah, yeah,
they replace Gibbons's like moral narrative with like kind of political pragmatism, and that's Machiavelli's, I mean, direction. And so Rienzi, I see him as kind of like this dream of the virtue reborn, like the virtue of the Roman Republic, which we talked about before. We're talking
yeah,
about Cincinnatus. I mean, there's so many Roman.
right.
There's books literally titled Roman Virtue, which I think are very different, and especially if you just read the text of the Bible, talking talking about the virtue of St. Paul is very different from talking about Roman virtue. I don't think they're necessarily like contradictory. I'm just saying they're different things.
Yeah,
Um, and it's interesting to consider like the virtue of the civic virtue, and of course that's what Gibbon was lamenting, right? Because what is the key question in the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire is why did Rome fall? And effectively, if you had to ascertain a thesis, it would be that according to Gibbon, which we can quibble with all we want, but at least what coming to terms on his own terms with him, he would say it was the loss of civic virtue. That is to say, people had virtue of all these beautiful things that were done in Rome. People stopped paying attention, and then this is what happens.
yeah. So
So,
he kind of this is an example of well, this is proof that the yearning for those ideals in some way was still around. Even almost 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and that maybe there's just some timeless sort of yearning for the sense of order and and justice that people associated with the Republican era of Rome, which obviously is somewhat idealized in reality, but it still kind of goes to you that this legend resurfaces from time to time, and of course, as we know, it came back during the Risorgimento of the 19th century, in which Italy, was reunited under Giuseppe Garibaldi,
mhm.
and and became a modern nation. And then obviously you had Mussolini, and he also pushed for the rest. He used the restoration of Rome as like a key facet of his burgeoning fascist idea and doctrine, and that influenced others, and in Europe and whatnot. So it kind of goes back. You see this like attempt at like I don't even know if these people necessarily literally tried to wanted to recreate Rome as it truly was, but that they were certainly drawing inspiration from aspects of that and putting that into their idea of like, what statehood could be. So yeah, you see them coming time and time again back to that. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned, yeah, it's an interesting distinction that you mentioned that, um, yeah, the Renaissance humanists, like they weren't, so some of them might have been trying to actually recreate a Roman state more in some way, but the end result was not quite that. But they took these ideas and I think refined them in certain ways that I think worked better with the medieval, like late medieval world in which they lived, and that kind of helped us get out of that and into what became the early modern era, as we all know. So this is a fascinating time period. And yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of works of art. Obviously, Wagner, several others, poets, and
Well, and Wagner
yeah,
based his opera Rienzi, which is his first successful opera,
yeah,
on a book that was written by a English author as well. So I mean, it was I think you could say it was kind of in the collective unconscious of like Europeans in the Romantic era, because I mean he is a very romantic figure. I think
yeah,
Rienzi.
absolutely.
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
there like a romantic stereotype in some ways, like
yes, yeah,
fire
yeah.
dreamer? Yeah, yeah,
Especially from a political perspective, because like, and that's sort of the irony, because Gibbons is this rationalistic and empiricist Enlightenment figure, basically, but he's trying to reconcile, I think, well, I mean, his vision for what Rome is, and like how do we reconcile rationalism with romanticism, and maybe it's through Rienzi. He's almost like a dialectical merge of the
yeah,
two. I mean, and maybe Rienzi, the reason he's so attractive is because we see this figure a time and a time again. Like every age kind of produces its own dream of Rome. Even in like that 1999, the movie Rome, there is this dream of Rome. You know, every age, like
yeah.
the American founders, they were thinking about their own dream of Rome. Even the creation of the European Union that we have discussed doing a podcast about, like in their founding of the Treaty of Rome in like 1957 or whatever it was, they had their dream of Rome, and it's kind of this eternal recurrence, which of course is a
Right.
Nietzschean concept. It's like the eternal recurrence of civilization.
Well, even the founding of the United States was heavily influenced, like the bicameral legislature, the Republican nature of it. We had like a thing on that.
On Polybius, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Polybius talked about
And
the Roman
Washington,
Constitution.
Cincinnatus, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah. Well, it's interesting because like in the future, yeah, Ramsey was seen as this like kind of noble, dreamer who foresees like the future and became romanticized as part of this kind of nationalist kind of narrative. But like as we've seen in the biography I gave of him, the reality of the man was a lot more complicated.
right.
He was both idealistic but also sometimes, you know, didn't really know how to achieve that in practicality. He made enemies with the wrong people. He was a bit vain, and then at times he even, de devolved into petty, cruelty and tyranny on a small level, which alienated his own people and his demagogic support of the people, which is kind of ironic. But a lot of people forget those details when they, put this man up on a pedestal later, and he's been made into many statues in Rome and many streets and whatnot, and Rione, which is like a administrative kind of a division of Rome. They've been all named after Cola di Rienzo. So he's become kind of like this the man, the myth, the legend kind of thing. And yeah,
I mean,
it's fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, you look at all these figures of Rome. I mean, Gibbon doesn't even start off with the Republic. He does mention them sometimes, but you think about like Caesar and like Octavian, and even Mark Antony and like other figures, even Cleopatra, and I mean we have such great figures, and of course we go over into Constantine, and I'm skipping all like the Antonine emperors, which are
Yeah.
amazing as well, right? But I mean, and then you go over into the Byzantine emperors, which had quite a few good emperors, right? And it's how do you I think no matter what, even if you're a rationalist or an empiricist, and you just want to be supremely rational and you have really good prose, you still feel that Gibbon is sad about the fall of the Roman Empire. Like he says at the beginning, like the greatest standard of living for those living within the empire and had the means were was like at the age of the Antonines, and it just all went downhill from there. But there was so much produced, and like, what do you do with this melancholy in the ruins of human greatness, and how do you reconcile that if you've dedicated yourself as a rationalist? Um, and then I guess as like maybe modern reformers, in whatever political climate they may find themselves in, do they really think about Rienzi? I guess they were in the early 1800s, right? Like, or they
Sure,
were
yeah,
thinking about maybe
absolutely.
not Rienzi the accurate person like you said, but they're thinking about like some romantic
Yeah, his
notion of
legacy.
him. Yeah,
But then again, we have romanticized recollections of most Roman emperors. I mean, there is a lot of
right.
problematic emperor, and those that were really bad, yeah, they were remembered as really bad. Obviously, Nero, Caligula, and whatnot. But
Yeah.
kind of fits into the complex and checkered tradition of rulers that, styled themselves along the idea of Rome, and
Hmm.
so and Caesar himself, needless to say, was a complex
Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah,
individual.
yeah. And that's another topic we might want to get to at some point. But I mean, I think like poetically, Petrarch would say, like, we're always talking about this dream of Rome. Like he would say, like, Rome is not dead, but Rome is sleeping, and we're the ones
Right.
dreaming that dream of Rome, which, almost reminds me of other things. We don't, you're dreaming a dream of someone else or of a thing that didn't exist. But it's interesting because like I think like in Gibbon's mind, like every civilization kind of ends twice. It ends actuality and history in whatever
Right.
rational way, but then it also ends in the imagination. And I
Right.
think like that's why he closes with Rienzi, is because he's not writing about the fall of the Roman Empire. He's writing about the fall of the idea of Rome, which is strange because of course he writes his first volume in
Right.
1776.
Even then, the idea was
Yeah.
not dead, but that was the
Yeah.
last, like, sort of maybe real-ish effort at, you know, doing something and invoking the name of Rome in a political. I don't know. But I
Yeah.
get your point. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they were thinking about Rome in like 1776 and Philadelphia, July 4th for the Declaration of Independence, but certainly when they were coming up with the Constitution of the US,
Right. Right.
they were, they had all those Federalist and anti-Federalist debates that adopted these nom de plumes of, you know, of virtuous Roman citizens, like
Yeah.
Publius and things like that. Um, So it is interesting.
Hmm.
It's interesting to just consider the philosophical nature of like dreaming a dream of someone who is dead or is not dead, but that person never existed because Rome as such was not a person,
Yeah.
and then it's just sort of metaphorical. But I mean, I think it speaks to us using these terms as like collective unconscious, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
Rome, even if you were like illiterate, I think would like live in your conscious. I mean,
Right.
like being passed down
Everybody
through folk tales and tradition and things like that.
everybody knows about Rome in some way. Even in indirect ways. But it's kind of what you said, or what you said that Gibbon said was interesting in that, like, it's kind of like that idea of, like, a person also dies, uh, multiple times, like when they actually die, when their name is last said, and when they're like completely forgotten, by everyone else, or when all their descendants, things like that. So it's like, in this case, it's the idea of Rome, which I think will go on much longer than most people, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way to frame it. Yeah, I mean, like you like a person may die multiple times, and like Rome could die multiple times.
I
You
mean,
know.
But I mean, are there empires in the past that just we completely forgot about or completely forgotten in history? Maybe
Well,
not
I mean,
empires, but early, states and things.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say like a lot of people say, what would we know about the Peloponnesian War if Thucydides never wrote? I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point.
the way to answer that is that I can't answer it because we simply don't know. Like we know about the Sumerians, the Akkadians,
Yeah,
and all these different entities that existed, but I mean, we don't know about the Dark Ages of Greece. I mean, things were going on, but
yeah,
we
yeah.
don't know, and
Very
like what
good
was going
point.
on with
Yeah,
Celtic and Nordic tribes. And I'm not saying they were massive empires, but um and I guess like personal note, I feel like Gibbon, he's not necessarily chronicling like just a political collapse, which I guess Rome was sort of a political collapse, but it's kind of this slow erosion of meaning. And
yeah,
like a word is just echoed as like Rome, Rome, Rome. It's like, well, Rome fell to Attila the Hun, right? But then it fell again like a couple years later, and then
yeah.
like all of the Western Roman Empire fell, and then the Eastern part survived. And it's like, well, what does Rome mean? And I mean, it's a philosophical thing. I mean, he definitely considers like Constantinople in 1453. This is the political continuation of Rome,
Yeah.
but like the word has lost meaning or changed. And I mean, like,
Yeah.
I mean, you said like other civilizations and like what do we not know about? I mean, we may not know exactly what people thought. It's so hard even for us to communicate like as humans what we think. I mean, like there's this Egyptian notion in ancient Egypt of like the name of the soul is Ren. You know what I mean? The Ren.
Mm.
It's like, and then um, but then that soul's name changes through time, like people, and like you're living through memory. So going back to that, well, like I said, it was a brilliant example. Like person dies like several times. It's like when they actually like the body fails, I suppose, right? And then
Mm.
again when their name is spoken for the last time. But like, but that in itself is like the memory changes, right? Because in
Right.
between that moment of the last name being or the last time a name is spoken and the first time, or yeah, I guess when the body fails, that memory changes and evolves, and likewise that the name of Rome evolves.
Right.
So it's I mean, I think that's yeah, it's a fascinating connection that you made there.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah, I
it
mean, yeah, I mean, like you said, he's a scholar. He was a notary, right? Which we didn't even
yeah.
really talk about that much. I mean, he was a poet. He was like a dreamer, right?
Yeah.
And I can imagine he's reading like Livy and Cicero and trying to figure out like the blueprints for his own time. And I think maybe you and I are trying to do that too. It's like we're talking to this podcast. Obviously, these people speak to us, right?
Mm.
Um, and I mean, he's trying to reestablish the Roman Republic, and like the Senate and the people of Rome, right? SPQR.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think I don't know. Do you see Rienzi as kind of just like this guy in the ruins of Rome, just shouting people, but kind of as a crazy man, or do you think he's more in tune with reality?
Well, he was a bit of an idealist in that regard. I can definitely see the, slightly crazy angle for sure. Uh, but he surprisingly was able to get some things done, even if he was politically active and held power for like, 6 or 7 years overall, and then, that's not nothing at the time. But like we said, it's more the legacy of what he did that was used by, later uh, figures and politicians that was like the important, kind of thing. The takeaway from all that. I wonder how like notable he was during his own time. If I mean, he did travel throughout Europe and stuff, so and he did get audiences with like the emperor and the pope, so he was a pretty big deal at the time. So
Oh yeah, I mean he must have been because like obviously people were writing about him, right?
right,
I
right, and
mean,
like we have quite a bit of details on his life, so that's
yeah.
noteworthy. Yeah.
And obviously like his legend lives on. Um, and he was, and I mean other people like had like Wagner, I mean, and all these others had ideas of what he was. So they must have had like multiple sources, I would guess, to kind of pick up on that. Um, so I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree. with that. I mean,
Well, it looks like we're running short on time.
all right,
So I guess
yeah, we
let's
got to wrap it
start
up.
wrapping it up. So yeah, any last word? I mean, we basically summed up like this the significance of this guy, and it's kind of an interesting, vignette of someone's life during this time and how the dream of Rome still endured after all, you know, all those years. And yeah, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, civilizations die, like we said, and we know some of them die, like Athens, Rome, Jerusalem, and we remember it, and sometimes reanimate it just by talking about it. And like in a weird way, we're like scholars, but like scholars are kind of like priests in a way, where they're like just trying to keep this name alive, and it's like I think, yeah, I mean, the Roman Empire died, but I mean, we're kind of resuscitating it just by talking about it. I mean, it's not just us. I mean, anyone else who does as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my last thoughts on that.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next episode. It's
All
been the
right, thank
Charlie and Andre
you,
podcast.
thank you, thank you.